Rich is the director of Fusion all over the world. I about said Fusion USA, Rich, but you are all over the world, aren't you?
It sounds grander than it is, but yeah, I have the honor of serving the nation leaders in England and Wales and
Mhm.
Scotland and the US and Spain at the moment.
Wow, that is incredible. I first came across the topic of spiritual parenting when I was at New Room and later in the South Georgia Global Methodist Conference. You had Miriam come and do a wonderful workshop there last year. And I
Mm.
have just been intrigued not only with those, but also Ricky Moore's book, Turning Hearts, which just came out with this topic of spiritual parenting because, much like me, I'm sure that there are a lot of churches out there that have a lot of older adults that they can mobilize for ministry to reach the younger ages. And the question is, how? How do we do that? What are the keys to doing that? I want to give a brief introduction this morning from our friend JD Walt. And if you know JD, you know that JD loves to talk about this topic. And he was talking
Mm.
about Moses, and he said Moses basically was kind of drugged by God into being a spiritual parent. And he says,
Mm.
God says to Moses, so now I'm sending you. And here's just a few sentences of what JD says. He says, there are still places in the world where the old is to be revered and set apart as the elders. The elders are the most experienced, wisest, most spiritually mature members of any community. At the same time, they have the most discretionary time and, in many cases, the most wealth. And then a few more sentences. Still, in most of our culture, i.e., America, they are increasingly sidelined, rotated off boards, and encouraged to vacate positions of leadership so younger people can have a turn. But then JD says, he says, we need the dreams of elders to converge and commingle with the visions of the young. Our churches seem to have been more formed by the sociological principles of our time than the theology of the Bible. And I think that's a profound statement.
Yeah.
So, to get us started, what does spiritual parenting mean to you? And why is Fusion enthusiastically embracing this concept? Why is it so important? What do you think?
Well, I mean, it started for me 30 years ago, Barry, if you can believe that. I was 21 years old, and God had just begun to speak to me about working with students. And I had
Hmm.
no real idea that I'd still be doing that 30 years later. But someone prayed
Hmm.
for me and prayed for me about fathering, spiritual fathering.
Hmm.
And it resonated with something deep inside me. And I just began
Hmm.
to weep. And it was quite a strange thing for a 21-year-old to be thinking or responding in that way to being a spiritual father. But for me, that's where the journey started. Um, and I think what's gone on since then is it's just deepened and it's really deepened. I think I've carried this. I've tried to outwork it. I've definitely made some mistakes along the way.
Hmm.
And then I think in the recent years, God has kind of showed me a whole new perspective on how he views the church and how he
Hmm.
views his family.
Hmm.
And really, are the invitation that he's giving out at the moment, which kind of chimes with what you've talked about,
Hmm.
uh, the JD mentions there, is that
Hmm.
there's much more work for us to do. And that
Yeah.
he really is concerned with building his family. So we're
Hmm.
grateful for our small expressions of family, if we have them. Lots of
Hmm.
people don't. And this is the good news. This is the gospel that there's
Hmm.
family for us
Hmm.
because God has created it. And that ultimately is the one that is going to continue. Um,
Hmm.
so I think when we start engaging seriously in spiritual parenting, we enter the deep waters of communion that are going to go on for
Hmm.
eternity. And so that is something that has gripped me
Mhm.
and I'm learning how to articulate it. I'm still not there yet, but I feel
Mhm.
like I've touched this deep seam of gold that is in God's eternal plan, and we get to
Mm.
participate in that now. And
Mm.
and we'll talk about that, what that means for the church who are here on
Uh-huh.
earth, side of heaven. That
Mm.
there's actually no one who's on the bench at the moment, or doesn't need to be. Um,
Mhm.
and so, in terms of how that dovetails with Fusion are passionate
Mhm.
about seeing young adults find home, hope in Jesus, and home in local church. And if we're
Mhm.
to see that happen effectively, we need the generations working together. And we need a biblical view of generations working together rather than a cultural, sociological view, because we've
Mhm.
actually got a lot more in common than we have that separates us. But that's not the noise that we get through from media. And so we've got some work to do to overcome
Mhm.
some of the lies and the obstacles that might stop us building bridges across the generations. Um, so I think it's probably always been important in God's
Mhm.
heart, and there's probably
Mhm.
never been a generation in the church that isn't charged
Mhm.
with this role of spiritual parenting. But it
Mhm.
does seem at this time that there's more invitations being given out from heaven because of what He's doing in the earth right now, and I do believe we're in times of awakening. It's
Mhm.
slow, it's hidden at times, but there's something going on, and therefore I believe that this
Mhm.
conversation and practice around spiritual parenting is only just beginning.